Today we're talking about Anoushka Shankar and the background of fusion music, and also Anoushka Shankar's background herself. So first of all, she was born in the beginning of the 80s in London, and she was the daughter of a famous sitar player, Ravi Shankar. So she was brought up in London, but also she was brought up in Delhi in California in her late teens. So she signed her first recording contract at 16 years old, which is similar to Kate Bush, and her first 3 albums were Indian classical performances. Her first crossover fusion album was released in 2005, which was Rise, which actually got nominated for a Grammy. She collaborated with major artists like Sting and also George Harrison and her father Ravi Shankar and her half-sister Norah Jones. Moving on to Breathing Underwater, which was her 5th album. Her main collaborator was Karash Kale, who was an Indian musician and composer, also the co-founder of Tabla Beat Science. One of the guest artists on the album was Sting, who sings on the track Sea Dreamer, and actually Breathing Underwater acts as a prelude to Sea Dreamer, because if you listen to it you can hear motifs from Sea Dreamer in Breathing Underwater. There are more contributions from other artists such as Salim Merchant, who is a Bollywood string arranger. He would be really good for your extra listening to listen to some there, as well as Nitin Sohei actually. So the album does contain some programmed and sequenced tracks because it's placed in 2005, so this is where there's a rise of technology. Not as big as how the Beatles used their technology, however, she does use technology. Most of the solos and stuff are live music. So there's a quote actually in the Pearson notes that Anoushka Shankar said, and it goes like this: "I felt I could push further in riskier ways for me, working with a string orchestra, having vocals in English or using conventional Western structures and chords." Now looking at the forces she used, so she had both Indian and Western instruments, so for example obviously the sitar, tabla sarangi, and also the percussion, so the manjira, which is Indian finger cymbals. Then you have the things like the string orchestra, solo cello, the programmed and sampled drum patterns. And the string orchestra actually is the Bombay Cinematic String, so that's taken from like Bollywood style things from Salim Merchant. Looking at the vocals that are sung by Noah Limberski, you can really note the soulful jazz and R&B style, especially with the improvised riffing, especially in Burn. When talking about sitar playing, you can use certain words, so they're basically Indian equivalents of what we already know. So for slides we can use meend, for grace notes we can talk about Khan, vibrato Andalan, and for mordants and trills you can talk about Gamak. So in the exam it's most likely going to be a question on comparing or contrasting the Indian influences and the Western influences, or at least highlighting the differences. So you can talk about the instrumentation and how they merge Western and Indian together, and then you can look at melody and harmony, so you can focus on how modes are used and how that relates to tals. You could also put on the idea of the improvisation and how that has influences in both Indian and more Western countries. Maybe you could talk about jazz. You could also look for Western influences. You could look at the call and response that are used. When looking at rhythms, you could talk about how some parts of it may have more of a free-flowing rhythm, so free time. So you can link that to improvisation again. And then you could compare it with like the Western drum sort of sequences. And then the structure, you can talk about the alap, gat and jala, which if you've done GCSE music that relates to like the rag dash types of things, but I'll put it up as what they are in Western equivalents. So you could talk about LARP, GAT, and JALA, and then you could compare it to the verse and chorus traditional pop structure of Western music. That's basically all you're going to need to know, but if you have more context points, please feel free to put them in the comments below. They'll serve as a really good revision source.